Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. A lot to discuss on the program today, so let's get started. Now, first up, we have a major development in the Henry Segura retrial, but we're not going to get to that just yet. We're going to get to that in a little, because right now we are going to see opening statements at around 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in the trial of Mark Sievers, the man accused of plotting the brutal murder of his wife, Teresa Sievers. It's alleged that he hired his friend Curtis Wright Jr. to kill his wife, but then he recruited a man named Jimmy Ray Rogers. Well, does this sound familiar? It should, because we covered the trial of Rogers, who was convicted of second-degree murder. Wright Jr. took a plea deal, potentially 25 years in prison for second-degree murder, in exchange for testifying against Rogers and now Sievers in this trial. Sievers himself has been charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy and could face the death penalty if convicted. Now, as we wait to jump live, let's preview this trial with someone who's been following this case very closely and will be reporting outside the courtroom, Jaclyn Bevis, a reporter from NBC2 News. Jaclyn, great to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
All right, so you got to tell us, what can we expect today? We saw Chapter 1 of this saga. Now this is Chapter 2. What can we expect from day one?
Of course, starting with opening statements today, we'll get a new idea of the state's position in this case. We expect it to be somewhat similar to what we saw in the Jimmy Rogers trial. But of course, there's going to be some tweaks. Mark Sievers was never believed to have been in the house when this murder happened. So there's a definite change there, and there's going to be more of an effort, I believe, to focus on the conspiracy of this case. That's obviously what the state has to prove to say that Mark Sievers is guilty of first-degree murder and the entire planning of it. So I think we'll get a lot more of a backstory on Mark Sievers and Curtis Wright, their childhood relationship, their long-standing relationship across state lines. Curtis Wright, of course, living in St. Louis area where Mark Sievers was from in Missouri. Mark Sievers down here in Fort Myers. So we expect that. We're also going to hear and get our first glimpse of the defense in this case. We really have minimal idea of what they're going to say in connection to this, whether it's just if the defense is simply that Curtis Wright is lying, if the defense is something a little more, and then we'll go into some of the state's first witnesses in Jimmy Rogers' trial. That began with family of Teresa Sievers. Her sister was on the witness stand, I believe, first. So I expect to hear from some family still on the witness list in this case. We'll also likely hear from Dr. Mark Petritis. That'll be a big one today. Dr. Petritis is the individual who Mark Sievers called and had go check on Dr. Teresa Sievers at the home when she didn't show up to work that morning. In his testimony last time, he simply explained finding her there. Very minimal about his relationship with Mark Sievers, so much as to say he thought it was strange that Mark Sievers called him at all. Since then, we have learned that he expressed additional information, specifically in regards to Mark Sievers and his role in the death of Teresa Sievers. He told the state about that just prior to the Jimmy Rogers trial. It was not revealed to anyone until after the fact, after the entire Jimmy Rogers trial. So we expect to hear from him, and his testimony and questioning will probably be a little lengthier, seeing as though we now know that he is revealing he has additional information that he's just now sharing.
Yeah, look, two different trials here. You had a guy who was Jimmy Ray Rogers, who was actually in the house, and it was a whole discussion of, well, why was he brought there? Was he brought there? Did he know what the plan was? Did he just want to take a vacation? And there was an interesting back and forth to understand who actually wielded the hammer. But here, like you said, Mark Sievers wasn't in the house. You mentioned before the relationship between Curtis Wright and Sievers. Tell me what we know about this relationship, because I got to tell you, they even look alike. You know, there's this weird connection between them, and the idea, if we're going to be saying, well, if the defense says, hey, well, Curtis Wainwright took this matter into his own hands, and he decided to kill Teresa on his own, I would very much like to know why that is, because their relationship is going to be key here. What are some details that our viewers should know about the relationship between these people?
Some of the things that we've seen in the release of discovery, of course, in the state of Florida, public records laws allow us to see quite a bit of discovery before this. Some of the things that we have seen, Curtis Wright and Mark Sievers, long-standing friends. They're from the same area. They're in Missouri. we know that Curtis Wright was working for the Sievers medical practice at the time of the murder. He would come down here regularly. We've seen bizarre communication in regards to Curtis Wright between Dr. Teresa Sievers, Mark Sievers, and Curtis Wright. Some sexual relationships potentially between them that really rise this to the level of question. One of the most bizarre moments in the Jimmy Rogers trial was when they showed a photo of Curtis Wayne Wright on his wedding day, which is when they alleged, the weekend when they alleged that this planning began. They showed a photo of a classic wedding photo, Mark Sievers tying Curtis Wright's tie. Mark Sievers was his best man. And even Curtis Wright, in that moment on the witness stand, said, "I'm not sure which one's me. It looks like I'm looking in a mirror." They do look nearly identical. Outside of that, I'm sure that they're going to dig pretty deep, and cross-examination of Curtis Wright will be very interesting as well into that relationships, the ebbs and flows, the highs and lows, all of that I'm sure will be revealed. Another thing in that is the allegation that the two of them had burner phones to communicate solely about this planned murder. We're going to hear, I'm sure, a lot from the state about that. Of course, burner phones are just that. They're burner phones. There's very little traceable information from those. So a lot of that's going to have to come from Curtis Wright about exactly what they would communicate on those burner phones, what was said, and how this alleged plot unraveled.
There is a reason that Curtis Wright is the star witness in this case. He helped the prosecution the first time around, and Jimmy Ray Rogers secure not a first-degree murder charge against Rogers, but second-degree, win nonetheless for them. Now, I gotta ask you, jury selection here took several days, took a while. This is not a case that you see every day, and thank goodness it's not a case you see every day. What do we know about the jury here? What do we know about maybe some questions that were asked? What do we know the makeup of the jury? Because I imagine it might be tough to get a jury that A, doesn't know anything about this, and that might not be affected by the facts of this case, and that can go in impartial. So what do we know about this jury?
In the end, for general questioning yesterday, they had about 37 jurors in that room. It took every last one of them to seat this jury. In total, avoiding the alternates, which there are 2 alternates, there are 9 women, there are 3 men. They are, the majority of them are Caucasian. The majority of them are retirees, which is fairly common here in Southwest Florida. All of them, of course, death penalty qualified. None of them had very strong opinions either way on the death penalty. Some of them do have some experience with the legal system. One person on the jury even has family that is incarcerated. So some varying perspectives on the legal system and exactly how it works and how it's impacted their lives. Some of the employments of the individuals on the jury are also interesting. Very technical employments, a CPA, I believe, a former architect. But like I said, the majority of them retired. There are probably only 3 or 4 of them that are still working on a regular basis at a regular job.
Now, let me ask you this. This is a two-parter, okay? I'm very curious to see who's going to take the stand. We know that Curtis Wright will take the stand by all accounts. But have you heard anything to indicate if Jimmy Ray Rogers has taken some sort of deal to take the stand? And again, I don't imagine he would, because I don't believe he has that connection with Sievers the same way that Wright did. I'm curious if he does. And second question, have you heard anything to indicate whether Mark Sievers himself will take the stand and tell his side of the story in this trial?
So the Rogers has really been on my mind as well. We have not heard whether Jimmy Rogers has taken any sort of a deal with the state. I will tell you that his sentencing was scheduled for Monday and was later rescheduled. That tends to make me believe if he had planned a deal that was on the table, that they would have put that on the table and we would already know about it. I also would say, similar to what you said, his relationship in this case was never that he was speaking with Mark. It was always that Curtis Wright was an absolute middleman in this. There's very little indication that Rogers and Sievers ever communicated at all about this. I don't know that he would have much that he could bring to the table. Also, he was found not guilty of conspiracy, and he was, of course, found guilty of second-degree murder as opposed to first-degree murder. In saying that, I don't know that he would be able to bring much to the table in help of the state to prove this conspiracy or the first-degree murder case. So I don't know if he's been asked or offered that opportunity, and I don't know if he took it, but I'm kind of leaning towards the no on that. As for Mark Sievers, it's hard to tell if he'll take the stand. He still could, he still couldn't. I've spoken with his attorneys at times. They've never indicated either way. Of course, I think a lot of it, though, depends on how the trial goes. Jimmy Rogers' attorneys, in his case, indicated that they planned on putting 2 days of witnesses on the stand, and they put 0. So it really depends what the state ends up presenting, how they feel that things are going. Obviously, a lot of that could change over the next few days. And I say few days, 10, 11, 12 days.
Look, I can't wait just to see these two former best friends looking at each other in court, one of them testifying against another. That's something straight out of a movie that we're going to be watching. We have some time till that actually happens. Jaclyn, I know we have to let you go, but I want to ask you one last thing. What is the feeling from Teresa's family as now we go again into this Chapter 2 trial? How are they feeling about now going after the man, or the state going after the man who ultimately is accused of orchestrating everything?
Well, and it's not only that, it'll be the man who's ultimately accused of orchestrating everything. It'll also be, though, someone that they welcomed into their home, someone that they have an intimate relationship with. We have not seen the family here through jury selection. We do anticipate that they'll be here as we start opening statements. Of course, they were here from gavel to gavel for the Jimmy Rogers trial. They looked somewhat disappointed in the second-degree murder conviction, but of course, those emotions always very high as those verdicts are announced. So I'm anxious to see, but I expect all of them to be here. Her mother, her sister, her brothers, they sat through all of the other trials. Her sister is still on the witness list as well. But a lot of tension, a lot of anticipation, I believe, as they wait and see how this one plays out.
Jaclyn Bevis, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us what we can expect today. We hopefully can get you back on once the trial starts up and we can break down what's going to be happening. It's definitely going to be one to watch.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. Look forward to talking to you later.
Sounds good. All right, everybody, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we have to talk about the major update, the major development in the Henry Segura retrial. Stay tuned.